Welcome to Self-Publishing Made Simple, sponsored by Little Labradoodle Publishing.
Hello everyone, this is April Cox and we are in our weekly drop-in for the author work group, and today we are really excited to have Randy Whiteside with us today from Creative Writing Magic, and he is going to be talking about story structure. Thank you, Randy, so much for your time and for being here with us. This meeting is going to be recorded, and we're going to go through some slides from Randy. He'll have an FAQ time period for everyone. And then at the end of this, when Randy's done, I'll stay on for our typical drop-in session. So for anybody that has needs for one-on-one assistance or any topic you want me to jump into after this session, I will hang out here for you. Okay, so without further ado, I am going to mute myself and pass things along to Randy. Welcome, Randy.
Hi, April. Thank you, and hello to everybody. And April, I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. And as April mentioned, I'm going to be talking about story structure. And I run the website Creative Writing Magic, and we'll get into a little bit about what that is in a few slides. So let's get started. So the topics for today is first, why story structure? Second, an introduction to the hero's journey. Then just a brief little bio about me and Creative Writing Magic. And then we're going to talk about character development, character arc, and then the 7-point structure. And then finally, we'll wrap up with point number 7. So just an introduction. Basically, the structure that we're going to be talking about today is founded on the idea of the hero's journey story structure. And this was brought to the public attention by Joseph Campbell with the book Hero with 1,000 Faces back in 1949. And basically, it talks about a quest with a road of trials and a villain. So for those of you who aren't familiar, you will recognize kind of the hero's journey structure in many films and stories, even from the beginning of time, all the way back to the Greek classics. So the idea here is that within the hero's journey structure, that the main character from the beginning to the end becomes something greater. And as I mentioned, there's many examples, including The Odyssey, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Matrix, Wizard of Oz. And those are just to name a few. And today, I hope you all are Wizard of Oz fans, because we're going to go really in depth and kind of look at Wizard of Oz as our prime example to look at this. So before we get into the main character and the supporting characters, I just wanted to talk a little bit about why story structure. And oftentimes, as new writers, or sometimes when we just feel like writing something from inspiration, we just want to kind of write and let it flow and just kind of see what happens when we start moving the pen or typing on the keys. But the whole idea of story structure is just like building a house. And with building a house, you have a blueprint and you're essentially building to that blueprint. And that's kind of what story structure provides to us as writers, is a framework, not necessarily to define the story, but just to guide it. So with that, just wanted to jump right in here to the main character and the supporting characters. So as we all know, the main character is the focus of the story. And really there's 3 elements that are really kind of brought to the forefront when we do write this story. And that's the hero's strengths, weaknesses, and their desires. And the story kind of weaves itself through all 3 of those. And then of course we have the supporting characters. And this is just a short list, but essentially we've got the sidekick, mentor, villain, and minions, who all kind of support the story. And then of course we have the quest. So the quest is kind of where the whole story structure comes into play. And the quest is all about the main character. So essentially in the beginning of the book, the main character has a normal life in an ordinary world, but has a desire for something greater. And really, it's that desire for something greater that drives the story. And then they accept the call to adventure and they enter a magical world as opposed to the ordinary world. And then through a road of trials, the heroes find an inner strength where, against all odds, they defeat an opposing force or villain and they obtain the reward. And then the hero returns back to the ordinary world, but changed for the better. So that's kind of the underlying character arc, which we're getting into here. So essentially, the main character, as we've been saying, undergoes a change as a result of taking on a challenge, which they're fixing the issue caused by this disruption. And the main character passes through a series of tests, which they learn new skills, and they use those skills to defeat the villain. And in doing so, the main character undergoes a change for the better. So two common examples of the character arc are the main character learns to love and the main character learns to be brave or finds courage. So through the stories that we all know and love, many times the main character kind of boils down to those two character arcs and taking the character from the beginning where they don't know how to love, at the end they find a way to love, or in the beginning they don't have a lot of courage and at the end they find the courage to defeat the villain. So a example, as I mentioned before, that we're going to talk about a lot tonight is the classic Wizard of Oz main character, Dorothy. So, of course, her strengths are that she loves her family. The weakness, especially in the beginning, is the fear of Miss Gulch. And the desire is she wants something better, which is perfectly exemplified by her singing the classic Somewhere Over the Rainbow song. And of course, we've got the supporting characters that we all know and love: Toto, Scarecrow, Tin Man, Cowardly Lion. And then the mentors, which we're going to talk a little bit more in depth in a bit here, but we're going to talk about first it being Professor Marvel, and then the more popular idea of Dorothy's mentor, which is Glinda the Good Witch, and the villain being the Wicked Witch of the West, and the minions being her flying monkeys. So the 7-point structure that we talked about is essentially, this is a boiled down version of the hero's journey structure that Joseph Campbell wrote about in The Hero of the Thousand Faces that we talked about in the beginning. And essentially, I've taken the 7 main points and brought it into kind of a more simpler structure that we can kind of follow. And the first, and we're going to go into each of these in depth. The first is the ordinary world, which we talked about. Call to adventure, meeting the mentor and initial refusal, crossing the threshold into the extraordinary world or magical world, road of trials, the showdown with the villain, and then finally the return home. So first up is the ordinary world. So this is the main character's hometown. And essentially what we want to do is build a world and include it in a time and place in history. So this can be modern day, it could be Earth, it could be another planet, it could be another time, another place. This is where, you know, the imagination can stretch for eons in terms of coming up with a world to place the main character in. And then in this world, we want to establish the main character's situation. So we want to embed the main character firmly into this ordinary world. And we talk about the likes of their own town, the dislikes, the townspeople's opinion of the main character, and most importantly, establishing the main character's desire. And that desire is what's going to push the story forward. So the ordinary world with the Wizard of Oz example, we've got Dorothys Home, the Kansas farm in the early 1900s. And the main character's situation is that she likes her family. She dislikes the rules about her dog Toto. The family thinks that she's not grounded. Miss Gulch thinks Dorothy and Toto are a threat to the rules. And the desire, as we mentioned, somewhere over the rainbow. So that firmly establishes Dorothy in Kansas, and we all kind of understand her situation. So the next item is the call to adventure. So you can think of this as the inciting incident, and it's a disruption to the main character's ordinary world. So this could be any type of disruption. Typically, it's new information comes in, a villain enters the scene. In the Wizard of Oz case, a weather event disrupts the main character's world. And the idea here is that the disruption comes in, but the main character is now forced to do something about it. And of course, we've got the Wizard of Oz example where the inciting incident, which disrupts Dorothy's world, is that Miss Gulch takes Toto away from Dorothy. And that causes Dorothy to panic, and she ends up running away to escape the entire situation. Which leads us to the meeting of the mentor and the initial refusal. So this is where the mentor comes into the story, and the call to adventure is daunting for the main character. And the mentor's job is to provide guidance, and the main character refuses initially to accept that call to adventure because it is so daunting. And in the Wizard of Oz example, the first mentor that I would say is Professor Marvel. And essentially, during Dorothy's running away from the disruption, Professor Marvel gives Dorothy a glimpse into an extraordinary world, even though we all know it was completely fabricated and he was a charlatan, but the concept was still in place. And Dorothy, because of the dauntingness of kind of running away and everything that's going on, she actually refuses the initial, she initially refuses the quest with Professor Marvel, and then goes back home to help her Auntie M. Which is where we get to crossing the threshold. So this is crossing the threshold into the extraordinary world. So after the initial refusal, our job as authors is to provide a strong push that leaves the hero with little to no choice to take action on going out into the extraordinary world. So this event gives the main character a reason to cross the threshold and take on the journey. So crossing the threshold example in Wizard of Oz is probably one of the most classic examples of this out there. And it's, of course, the Twister, where the Twister literally picks Dorothy up from the ordinary world and places her into the extraordinary world. So she crossed that threshold in a very literary type of way, and a classic one that we can all relate to and have, you know, strong memories of in watching this movie or reading the book. So the next comes the road of trials. So the hero at this point has entered into the extraordinary world, and this is where they're going to build up their skill set. And this is where the character arc really starts to go upwards. So the road of trials, this is the test where the main character learns lessons. And the whole idea here is where the main character starts to meet friends that are there to help the main character, as well as meet the minions who are there to try to take down the main character. And it's through these tests and trials that the main character starts building confidence as they continue on with their quest. So in our example, the friends, Scarecrow, Tin Man, Cowardly Lion, meeting the minions, the winged monkeys, tests and trials, building confidence. So this is the Yellow Brick Road. It's a well thought out road of trials because it literally is a road, the Yellow Brick Road. And Dorothy goes through that road in order to get to her destination. So next brings us to the showdown. So of course, this is the climax of the story, and this is where the main character has the showdown with the villain. And the idea here is that the main character must rely on and use what he or she learned on the road of trials in order to defeat that villain. And the sidekick and the other friends take a back seat at this point, because really it's all about the main character overcoming the nemesis or the adversary or the villain. And in our example, Dorothy learned courage on the road of trials and learned many other lessons. And she was able to use this courage to confront ultimately the Wicked Witch and pour a bucket of water on the Wicked Witch, which caused her to melt. And another great aspect to this is the Wicked Witch literally melting away from Dorothy's story. And then the final point here is the return home. And oftentimes with stories, sometimes we get to the point with the villain and the hero defeats the villain or the main character defeats the villain and they roll credits. But as Joseph Campbell has argued, and I've built into this story structure, there really is a final element after the villain is defeated, and that's the return home. So the whole idea here is that the heroes defeated the villain, but they're not out of the woods yet. And the one crucial task remains, and that is to return home back to the ordinary world. And what this does is it completes the circle, and it shows in stark contrast the main character back in the ordinary world, but as a changed individual or character. So the character arc example in Wizard of Oz, this is fixing the situation caused by the Twister. So the Twister disrupted Dorothy's life, and she went through a series of tests. She needed to see the wizard. She needed to get the ruby slippers, and in doing so, gain the confidence, gain the courage. So Dorothy's character arc is that she started out as this girl who was running away from Miss Gulch, but through this quest, she learned courage. So when she did return back to Kansas, she was changed. She now would be able to, quote, take on Miss Gulch, unquote, as if she were the Wicked Witch of the West. And they cleverly casted the same actress to play both parts, so that really reinforces the fact that she no longer needed to fear Miss Gulch because she already defeated the alter ego, so to speak, the Wicked Witch of the West. So she proves to herself that she doesn't need to run away from her problems. And that is the wrap up. So as April mentioned, this is kind of the foundation of my Creative Writing Magic website. I have a book out there called How to Write a Short Story, and it goes through all of the 7 points that we just talked about. And of course, I'm on social media and so forth. So with that, that's my last slide. So April, if you wanted to have any questions, I'm certainly open to that.
Sure. So I'm going to unmute everybody here. And if anyone has questions, feel free to go ahead and ask now.
Randy?
Yep.
I have a question. I actually met a different author named Chris Vogel. I think it was Chris Vogel who wrote something similar to this. Do you offer anything different from what he presents? I mean, he bases it on Joseph Campbell as well.
Absolutely. Christopher Vogler's book is another shining example, classic, in terms of outlining this story structure. And my 7 points are kind of the consolidated version of that. And essentially what it is, the reason why I wrote my book is because I had written books as a 12-year-old and so forth. And when I was around my early 20s, I really wanted to get back into writing. And I felt like everything was pretty daunting in terms of all these books out there that offered like all of these kind of how-tos and so forth. And at the time, I was just looking for just something very simple, like 7 steps that I could easily follow. And I actually never did find that when I was a 20-year-old, but over the course of my career and leading me towards the Joseph Campbells and the Christopher Voglers, I was able to find that, and I felt that it really helped my writing so much that I wanted to kind of bring it to the new writers who weren't necessarily looking for the very kind of lengthy book, just something more simple to get started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a book that I'm writing. It's like 4 or 5 years in the process, but it's a novel, and it's based on the hero's journey. It's an interesting. I mean, Star Wars. If you follow Star Wars, it follows it exactly like the great demonstration that you showed. Great sample of the Wizard of Oz. It works perfectly with that.
Absolutely, that's a great point. So there's actually a clip out there on YouTube of George Lucas at a dinner kind of celebration where he publicly thanked Joseph Campbell for helping him give him kind of the structure to write the original Star Wars.
So Randy, I have a question. This is April. What about, I mean, those of us who are writing picture books or, early books, I know that, everything that's in this story structure in, words or less, what advice do you have for picture writers that in order to just make sure that we've got the meat of the story so that we have a good flow to our story?
Absolutely, that's a great point, April. Thanks for bringing it up. So I'm not sure if Lori Wright is on the line, but I've kind of had some conversations with her in terms of how do we bring this hero's journey concept into the children's book arena. And I've been kind of looking to find ways to incorporate that. And what I've found is boiling it down to a character, a problem, and the resolution of that problem is kind of a very good starting point for children's books. So I've been working with a couple individuals, and their children's book were very much linear. So it was kind of like story starts here, something happens, and then that's the end of the book. And in helping them in their writing, I've encouraged them to kind of build this problem that is what the kind of the main character of their children's book is going to revolve around. And in doing so, it really brings a lot of strength to their children's book because all of a sudden there's kind of a reason to turn the page.
Right.
So going back to the 7 points, it's not necessarily bringing the 7 points in as it is kind of like, kind of around that problem, which is kind of the call to adventure, and then having the resolution take place where there is, even if it's small, a character arc at the children book level.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fair. And I'm sure that it gets more and more complex as you get into chapter books and novels. For sure, I think this would be helpful. I know I've worked with you a little bit on the novel that I've started, and had to put that aside for a little while. But I'm actually starting to pick it up again. So I'm going through the work we started, Randy, and starting to move that forward as well.
Excellent. Yeah, that's really great to hear.
Anyone else have a question for Randy?
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
You say like the structure of the story is like the blueprint of a house, and then you gave those 7 points. So when you begin to work on a story, do you tend to use like the mind map or more of an outline? And is there one work easier over the other, or what else
Yeah,
can you say about that?
that's a great question. So when I write, I start with the outline and I go from there and I kind of fill in each section. Certainly there's the element of the mind mapping once you start to get into it and you can kind of branch off and bring in different ideas. But I would say that for the most part, it's putting together that outline and using that as the blueprint and sticking to it, and then bringing in the other ideas once I feel like I have that strong story structure in place.
All right. Once you've fully developed the problem and solution, then you can add something.
That's absolutely right. Yep. And I'm sure that everyone on this call, you know, once you start getting into this, can relate to this. Once you start getting into the stories start to just, you know, take on a life of its own in your imagination, and you have no other choice but to do the mind mapping to make sure all the ideas are connected.
Yeah. Andy, do you have any tools or things that you would recommend that authors could use to help with this story structure?
Yeah. As was mentioned, the book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell, this is an absolute classic, but as we talked about, it is very dense, extremely dense. So Christopher Vogler wrote The Writer's Journey, and that's a lot more consolidated and kind of a little bit more modern. So I would say to start with those, and certainly on YouTube, there's a lot of information about this as well. My book is only about 40 to 50 pages long, so it's a quick read, and it certainly can help as well.
Yeah, I know I did, when we started working together, I downloaded the ebook and read through it in one day. And I found it to be really easy to follow and easy to understand. So I would highly recommend others that are listening in or here with us today to go and check out Mandy's book. I think you won't be sorry that you did.
Thanks, April. So the one slide that we didn't get to, and if everyone is up to it, unless there's any other questions, I just wanted to kind of quickly talk about my background.
Oh, yes, please. I'm sorry that I didn't have that ready to introduce you that way. My apologies.
Oh, yeah, no problem at all. So last year, 2018, I founded Creative Writing Magic to help authors, specifically new authors, improve their stories. So it kind of goes back to that idea where as a 20-year-old, I was kind of sitting in Barnes and Noble, like reading as much as I could on how to write a story and so forth. And it's kind of me giving back and kind of being the mentor to new authors that are kind of going through the same type of journey in finding their own kind of story writing. And this all started when I was 12 years old in 6th grade English class. We had an English class assignment where we were to write and illustrate our own children's book. And the idea there was, and by the way, April, you'll appreciate this, it was in Massachusetts where I was living.
Oh.
So my book was actually about the Mayflower ship in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And essentially the idea there was that as 6th graders, 12-year-olds, we would learn English instead of reading from books, grammar and sentence structure and that sort of thing. We would actually write and illustrate our own books. And then through that, the 6th grade English teacher essentially taught us how grammar works and all of the other pieces that go with that. And then after college, I went into engineering in corporate America, so I kind of strayed away from the writing path. And then I came full circle and returned to my passion of writing and illustrating, and wrote the children's book, Travis and the Courageous Path. And then, of course, the book that we talked about, How to Write a Short Story, and built the Creative Writing Magic website.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate your time and appreciate the fact that you're able to answer questions. Okay, so what's the best way for people to reach you if they have follow-up questions or they would like to learn more about the story structure?
Absolutely. So creativewritingmagic.com has all the information you need, including links to social media, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. And yeah, feel free to contact me through social media, or my email is on the website. So I'd be happy to talk more about the story structure elements.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You've been watching a special episode of our free author work group. This has been a special event brought to you by Little Labradoodle Publishing. If you are watching this replay and are interested in taking advantage of our author services, visit www.thelittleLabradoodle.com/services. Select one-on-one author coaching and use the code FIRSTFREE. That's all one word in capital letters, FIRSTFREE, and you'll not pay anything for your strategy or coaching session. This is April Cox, and thank you for watching Self-Publishing Made Simple.